I'm sure it's good. I've not tasted of it yet, but I'm sure it is good. All right, so I told her that we would announce that for her this morning. So you give that homemade bread a little bit of try. She knew where to bring the food. That's it. If you can't get anything else out of this class, you ought to be able to get something good to eat, you know? So take a chance at the bread and then order you some. All right. We're going to get into our study of Nehemiah, and we're going to pick up chapter 4, verse 8. And you remember last week we looked at the first of several attacks, if you will, made by the opposition to the building of the walls in Jerusalem by Nehemiah as the governor. And we looked at the first in verses 1 through 7. We looked at the first attack, which was ridicule. They made fun, they ridiculed, they tried to put pressure, mental pressure, on the individual Jews, and Nehemiah certainly as the leader. But as verse 7 tells us, nothing wins like success. Verse 7 says, "But when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the men of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry." And they were very angry because the Jews were winning. The Jews were succeeding. The Jews were continuing to go ahead, even though their efforts at ridicule and shame were not working. But beginning in verse 8 and then verse 9, we have the second action that they use against the Jews. Verse 8, "They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat." So the first action was shame and intimidation, more of a mental game. In the second, the enemies of Jerusalem took the effort at intimidating. Here was the second attack. And the same thing, can't spell and talk at the same time, that Satan uses against us, the world uses against us. And they determined they were going to come and fight against it. That was their first line of thought. But they also said that they would stir up trouble against it. That word trouble in the Hebrew carries the idea of confusion, chaos, and thus perversion, just a twisting up. And this may have been an effort at creating the illusion that the Jews were rebelling by Nehemiah against Artaxerxes. Maybe they were seeking to set up a situation. Maybe they were trying to provoke an incident. They were going to come fight against Jerusalem. And in doing so, by acting like this, they were going to create a confusion and a grounds to make a charge against Nehemiah and against the Jewish people to Artaxerxes. And this using of confusion, chaos, perversion, in other words, putting out rumor, putting out statements that sound like one thing, it isn't, but it sounds like it, seeing if we'll bite, seeing if we'll chase it, seeing if we'll run after it, and thus become a reason to accuse us to others. How often do we get sucked into chasing a rumor and end up looking like we're guilty because we're trying to defend ourselves? You ever get caught up in something like that, or know somebody that got caught up in something like that? You can go to Facebook, tweeting, all this other stuff that comes out. How easy it is for someone to make an insinuation, and then, we know it's wrong, and we try to respond but even in the response we begin to look guilty. That's what they were trying to do in this intimidation here with the Jews. They couldn't shame them into stopping. So now let's suck them in to a confrontation. Let's try to confuse the situation so much that it looks like they are doing something that they're not. And as long as Artaxerxes thinks they're doing something that they're not, that's all that matters to these folks. And this is more psychological efforts at harassing the Jews, and not just physical. This wasn't physical yet. It looked like it. They were going to act like it, trying to get the Jews to do something about it, but it wasn't physical yet, but it was more a psychological mind game. But look at what Nehemiah does. In verse 9 it says, "But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat." Nehemiah had gotten the point. Remember, he went to the Lord, verse 4, with the first intimidation, with the first attack, the ridicule. And he had gotten the point. Go to the Lord first and allow the Holy Spirit to calm you, to give insight, and to give reason to the emotions that we feel. And this time he did something as well as pray. He posted a guard day and night. And this was preventative in nature. He didn't have an army to go out and fight. And they didn't have the luxury of just stopping and then restarting and developing an army. They had to prevent any opportunity becoming an excuse for the enemy to attack and overcome. But he did post a guard. He did set up a response so that those who were trying to intimidate in this fashion could see this ain't going to work. This ain't going to work. And Nehemiah didn't give them any ammunition to use against him. He posted a guard, but he didn't raise an army. He posted a guard, but he didn't respond to the intimidation tactics. His response was just simply preventative. Okay, if you're going to come fight, we'll be ready for you, but we're not going to start anything with you. And it's really interesting that, we have to be careful of where and what we allow ourselves to become the center of. Yeah.
So, at this point in time, how many of Artaxerxes' guardsmen are still there that came with Nehemiah when he came?
I wouldn't.
Because
Yeah.
realistically, if those guys had attacked Nehemiah, they were attacking Artaxerxes.
Yeah, because he sent cavalry and officers with him. Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
But at the same time, these guys that were intimidating him, we can see later on what they actually are planning.
Right. Yeah.
But, they have to know all they can really do right now is
Bark.
Words and intimidation and all these, because if they actually physically attack them, I'm still thinking that some of that guard's probably still there.
Yeah, there may have been some that came with him as bodyguard, to Nehemiah. Probably most of them left. But.
And so they have to have that fear. They don't have fear of God.
No.
But they probably still have fear of
The king. Yeah.
And so they just got to kind of sit there thinking, like, what how many of those guardsmen are still there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Probably not many.
Probably not many.
Probably some, but probably not many. But at the same time, if I can't attack you, if I can get you to make the first move, then I can claim self-defense. I can claim, see, I told you Artaxerxes, And so indeed, they probably were held back just a little bit because there may have been some of the other Artaxerxes soldiers there with them. But at the same time, if we can provoke them, if we can get them to respond, if we can get them to bite at what we're throwing out there, we can wrap them up even more and wrap them up even more. And I think that's something that we need to really, take into heart, that when Satan throws something out there through anybody, you run into it at work, you run into it with associates and whatever. People saying things, and you know it's not right. But you have to, as Nehemiah, go to the Lord first to kind of get your head straight and realize that you're trying to be suckered into something. And if they can get you to move first, then all of a sudden all they got to do is just say, see, told you. And don't have to actually do anything. So I think it's one of the things that come out about this with what they're doing toward Jerusalem and toward Nehemiah. But then we move into verses 10 through 12, and we have the third action that comes up with this. They do something else. And it's interesting to remember now, chapter 2 through chapter 6, verse 15, happens in 52 days. Less than 2 months. All that we're reading here is taking place. It's almost like, you put out this little fire over here, boom, here's another one over here. You put that little fire out, boom, here's another one over here. It just seemed like it just kept rolling as it came in. And this is what we see in verses 10 through 12. Look what it says. Meanwhile, while all of this is going on, verses 1 through 9, meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is given out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. Also, our enemies said, before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them, and we will kill them and put an end to the work. Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us, 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. You kind of get 3 separate actions going at one time here with Nehemiah on the Jews. And this is really kind of a swarming tactic. You ever felt swarmed by the events of life and the people of life and Satan's attacks on you? You felt like you were just you got into a bunch of bees or yellow jacket nest, fire ants, type thing. These are 3 separate actions. However, you get a sense that these are happening almost rapid fire. The people in Judah said, the strength of laborers is given out. There's so much rubble, we can't rebuild this wall. Look at all the junk that's laying around here. And then also our enemy said, we're going to come and kill them. That word was still floating in the air. And then the people who lived near them, who lived near the edges of the area of Judah, near Ashdod, near the Ammonites, near Sanballat, they were saying, look, we're caught in the middle here. We're right on, he lives right over here on the next house. And wherever you go, Nehemiah, they're going to come and get you. You're putting us in danger by what you're doing, rebuilding Jerusalem. And the thing about all 3 of these statements, they were true up to a point. Problems are not nearly as much of a problem if they're really not so. But they become real difficult if there's elements of fact and truth in it. And there was. Yeah, there was a lot of rubble that they had to get rid of. That's true. The enemies had already said, we're going to come and kill you. Let's attack them. That rumor, that threat had gone out, no doubt. And then the people who lived near them said, look, you're putting us in a bind here. And wherever you turn, they're coming. So, you just need to quit, was the basic, message that they were given to them. And this is kind of a layering, first ridicule, then intimidation, then swarming. All of these were happening, continuing. They just didn't stop ridiculing and start something else. They just kept building. And I think that's one of the things that we as Christians, if we're facing just one problem, we feel like, okay, I can get a handle on this. But when you feel like you're facing 20 problems, it gets a little more difficult to do, a little harder. When the pressure starts layering on you, it feels like, I don't know if I can do this or not. This is one of the hardest aspects of trial, because it's not just one, it's all of it together. And it just keeps building and building on us. You ever felt like that? Ever felt weighted down with everything that you've got to deal with? This is what was facing Nehemiah and the Jews as they were trying to rebuild these walls. And this is something that, as we face as an individual believer, it takes some real concentrated effort. Look at what Nehemiah did. Verse 13 and really right on through the rest of the chapter. Therefore, this is response. Therefore, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to his own work. From that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor. The officers posted themselves behind all the people of Judah who were building the wall. Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other. And each of the builders wore his sword at his side as he worked. But the man who sounded the trumpet stayed with me. Then I said to the nobles, the officials, and rest of the people, the work is extensive and spread out. See, he was acknowledging this. The work is extensive and spread out, and we are widely separated from each other along the wall. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us. So we continued the work with half the men holding spears from the first light of dawn till the stars came out. At that time I also said to the people, have every man and his helper stay inside Jerusalem at night, so they can serve us as guards by night and workmen by day. Neither I, nor my brothers, nor my men, nor the guards with me took off our clothes. Each had his weapon, even when he went for water. Look at what he did. He had a swarm going on. He had leveled pressure going on. But Nehemiah's responses gives us several things for us to use when we feel that same pressure that comes on us, in particular situations or on a day-by-day basis. Verse 13 says he did something that could be seen and demonstrated as visual unity. When people are struggling with vision, let's rebuild the wall. Remember, they already said too much trouble. There's a lot of stuff tore down around here. There's a lot of rocks laying around. There's people all around don't like what we're doing, blah, 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 all that. When people are struggling with vision, keeping up the level of energy often requires them to see something that demonstrates leadership and response. They needed to see something. Nehemiah stationed some. He didn't station all. He didn't quit the work. He stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. In thinking about this, I was reminded of what Abraham Lincoln said one time. He said, I'm a slow walker, but I never walk back. And I think that's the case here. Things may have slowed down some, but they didn't stop. The point was making them stop. The point is making you and me stop being effective and useful servants of Jesus Christ. That's what Satan wants to do. He can't As a saved individual, he's not going to be able to drag your soul to hell. What's the next best thing he can do? Stop us from being effective. Stop us from having any type of testimony and witness. Make us a miserable Christian. And when we get into that situation, we need to see something that encourages us. And he did this. He took some people, placed them with their weapons. He showed a visual motivation to stay strong. This is what Nehemiah was saying to them, I'm not going to allow this to happen. And we together, I'm not going to be able to do it, but we all together are going to be able to stop this action of the enemies. And then in verses 14 and 15, Nehemiah moved to address the emotional state of the people. He said, don't fear them. They were afraid. And he said, now don't do this. Don't be afraid. Remember the Lord. And there's a reason that we're doing what we're doing. We're not rebuilding the city just because we just need a nice place to live. He said, remember your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, your homes. These were emotional answers to the swarming and all of this that was coming from these enemies. And it's easy sometimes for us to lose our perspective on our situations and get wrapped up in the turmoil than what we actually are about in the work. We forget why we're doing what we're doing. Why do we do what we do in this church? Why do you do, as whether you have a role, attendee, whatever it might be? I mean, why are you doing that? Well, we've been going here all our lives. I guess we'll just keep on going. Well, this right here will kill you if that's all the reason you're coming. This will beat you down. Why are we doing what we're doing? We're doing it for our wives, our sons, our daughters, our families, our homes. We're remembering the Lord. And out of that, we're saying, bring it, Satan. I ain't backing down. I ain't backing down. One of my favorite songs, and I've told you this before, is that song by Tom Petty, I Won't Back Down. That is one of my favorite. I want it sung at my funeral whenever it happens. That's one of the songs. That's one of the 3 songs I want at my funeral. That's one of them. And he wrote that song after his home in Los Angeles had been broken into. He was off on a concert or something somewhere. And why rich people don't put an alarm system in, I have no idea, But they broke into his home, did damage or whatever they did. And he wrote the song out of that incident, saying, I'm not going to stop doing what I'm doing. I won't back down because you criminals. And if you listen to the words, it's a good little song. I'm not a big fan of Tom Petty, don't get me wrong. But that song, to me, is a challenge as well as an encouragement. If he, as a sinner, didn't back down over somebody breaking into his house, as a believer with the promise of victory of Jesus Christ, I ought not back down in my dedication to Jesus Christ and service to him. Nehemiah told them that there is a reason you're doing what you're doing. He personalized the threat against them. And here's the line. And I think, we often think, okay, where's the line? We're supposed to love our enemies, do good to them who spitefully use us, and so forth. Where's the line? I think here's an example of where the line is with that. When it comes to the point of someone hurting your family, your home, time to get your sword. Time to get your sword. Don't be afraid to defend those that are yours. Now, that doesn't mean we go out here and bomb an abortion clinic or anything like that. but it does mean we protect and defend those that are dearest to us and are with us. Questions, comments on that? Okay. But when he did this, look at what he did along with that. Verse 15. When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated it, see that God had frustrated this thing. All that Nehemiah was doing was being impressed upon him by the Lord. He said, we return to the wall, each to his own work. He kept working. He refocused on the task, and then got back to it. Never get away from the task that God has given you. And serving him, living for him. Whatever area or avenue that he has opened for you. Don't give up the task. You might walk slowly sometimes, but don't walk back. Keep pushing. And then in verses 16 through 22, he moved to a continued plan for assurance. Look at what he said, verses 16 through 22. From that day on, half of my men did the work, the other half had the weapons. Officers were posted behind the people to give direction. Those who carried materials carried a weapon with them, did the work with the other. Each man on the wall had a sword by his side. The man who had the trumpet to call people together was standing right by me. We were ready. I said to the nobles, yeah, we're spread far apart, but when you hear the sound of the trumpet, come here. This battle is the battle that God is going to give us victory. You know, he continued a plan. He just didn't do something and stop, because this wasn't stopping. Whatever you're doing for the Lord, keep going. Don't let the enemy and the swarmings that he puts around you. I don't even know if there is such a word as swarmings, but whatever he does to try to overwhelm you, stay with the work. Stay with your duty in Jesus Christ. And then verse 23, Nehemiah led by example. Look at what he says. Neither I, nor my brothers, nor my men, nor the guards with me even took off our clothes. Each had his weapon. We set an example. One thing that will hinder any effort of doing for the Lord, building a wall for God, in whatever form you want to place that, is to feel that some are above or exempt from what they demand of others. Nehemiah required of himself, now remember, he's the governor. He's the top dog, if you will. He could have been standing around giving orders and stayed in his palace. But he required of himself and his staff what he required of the common man on the wall. And when you see that happening, that builds loyalty, unity, and success. When you're feeling swarmed, look at this section right here. It'll help you know how to deal with this right here. Comments? Am I hitting home on any of this? Am I making sense with anything here? Now, as we move into chapter 5, we get away from the attacks from the enemies on the outside. And remember I said, a couple of weeks ago that Nehemiah was going to have to deal with attacks from and difficulties from the outside as well as from the inside. Chapter 5 gives to us a difficulty, an attack, if you will, but not from the outside, from the inside. And it's an example of how we can become our own worst enemy in the middle of a work or in the middle of a need. Now, I'm not going to just read the whole chapter to you, but let's kind of set the stage a little bit. Nehemiah was focused on rebuilding the wall. That's why he was here in Jerusalem. And a natural part of that work was that people came in from the surrounding villages and towns, thus, their farms, to help with the work. And this naturally would lead to a reduction in workers for the farms, which then led to insufficient harvest and a resulting loss of money, food, and being able to make enough money to pay taxes to the king of Persia. And the problem then is a problem that often still happens. Whatever work we are doing, ever how great, we still have an obligation to our family to feed them, and our responsibilities. They said, we must, look at what he said. Now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their Jewish brothers. Some were saying, we and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain. And others were saying, verse 3, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain. And still others are saying, we've had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards. Although we are the same flesh and blood as our countrymen, and though our sons are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. It's interesting, the emphasis here on paying their taxes. Even though they were building the city of God, Jerusalem, the place where God would put his name, they still had to pay their taxes. They still had to fulfill their citizenship responsibilities to the king of Persia. And we do too. And look at the problems they were having. They were having to mortgage their fields. They were having to borrow money to pay the taxes on the fields and vineyards that they had mortgaged. They were getting to the point of selling their children to their fellow men because their fields belonged to others and they couldn't buy their fields back. And this cycle was just continuing. They couldn't get out of the cycle. They couldn't redeem their children because their fields belonged to somebody else because they had mortgaged them. Does it sound, rather modern today? People get into a financial situation to where it's just a cycle of, I can't get out of this. And we see it in calamities like hurricanes, earthquakes, and so forth. People taking advantage of those who are suffering. You ever see that? It's interesting. Now that spring break is over with, gasoline is about 25 cents a gallon cheaper than it was just before spring break started. Just one example of the many that we see. Where the people who have the ability take advantage of people who don't have the ability. And this is interesting. And they were raising a great, outcry about this. But now, let me open a can of worms here. Wasn't what was happening just good business? Look at it from the creditor's point of view. Did not Moses allow the people to buy people for loans? Exodus chapter 21, verses 1 through 11. Yeah. And Leviticus chapter 25, verses 39 through 42. Yeah. They were commonly called debt slaves, 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1. And from the creditor's point of view, if people were dumb enough to get into a situation, then we who are smarter ought to be able to take advantage of this. This is just simply the law of supply and demand. It's capitalism at its finest. It's life. Just deal with it. Now, who was right in this? The people or the creditors? What? I know I'm stirring up something here. I mean, I'm doing it on purpose, so.
In Exodus 22:25, they were to do this, but not to each other. Not to their own brethren, not to take advantage of their own people when they were in a bad way. And so I guess it goes back to that unity thing that he was trying to establish. And of course, we see that in Nehemiah's reaction here, he's angry.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
angry for several reasons.
Verse 7, when I heard their outcry and these charges, I was very angry.
He's angry for several reasons.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons he's angry, is the fact that they're taking advantage of their own people. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
He's angry too because the work on the wall has stopped.
Yeah, the question becomes, where's the line that separates good, shrewd business from taking unfair advantage? That's, where's that line? Yeah, it is. It is. That's why I said I'm opening up a can of worms here. I mean, because we see it in business, in our world, not just America, but our world today. Where's the line from being just a smart businessman and being someone who's taking there's the key, unfair advantage of another? Now, the passage gives to us some clues here. The poor were at a point of destitution. They weren't trying just to be middle class, to put it in our own language today. They were just trying to eat and stay alive. And costing us the very lands, taking our lands from us, we lose the means just to live. Landowners had to borrow money for Persian taxes, and this would have been with interest. Nehemiah called it usury, and that was forbidden. If you loan money to your fellow Jews, don't charge them interest. That was part of the law. To impose a burden or claim for repayment of debt. That's what usury means. Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 10. A secured loan based upon security. I'll give you my cloak if you lend me $1. And when I pay you $1 back, you give me my cloak back, not $1.50. That's for the Jewish people. The lands and the persons were not just on loan, but they were being sold. They belonged to others. And it's interesting. The less fortunate were not just hiring out their sons and daughters, but were subject to slavery. It's interesting in its use of the word daughters here. The word for slavery is the Hebrew word, which is the same for rape and subjugation. So these daughters were being sold for sexual favors, possibly to the people that had the money. I'll make you a deal. And it was dividing the people and their relationship to each other. The very infrastructure of an already feeble society. Remember, there probably wasn't but 50,000, 60,000 people in the whole area. To begin with, this wasn't, you're not talking hundreds of thousands of people here in a huge, prosperous country. The very infrastructure of a feeble society was being undermined, by the oppression of the haves and the response of the have-nots, to put it in our modern language. Now, we're not Israel, and we don't live in the Old Testament economy. But what does this tell us as New Testament Christians about business, the circumstantially poor, and doubtful Christian behavior? Where's the line Where's the New Testament line? Where's the New Testament draw the line here? Or does the New Testament say, doesn't make any difference? Yeah, I know that I am walking on eggshells, and I'm breaking most of them, in doing this. But this was what was happening. Is there any message for us in the New Testament about this? I think, and we can go to all kind of New Testament references on this, but I think we cross the line when business becomes playing on others' misfortune. When caring for our own becomes ignoring the needs of others. When opportunity becomes a subjugation of the power of others to succeed. And I think there's a lot of New Testament passages we could go to on that. James is one. He says, you see a brother who has a need and you have the ability to help him and you don't. He said, how dwells the love of God in you? I mean, that's harder than what I've just said. But that's part of the thing. The line, I think, for all of us, and I'm not against capitalism, not against people making money. I'd like to make some myself, but I'm retired, so I don't make a whole lot. You know what I'm saying? But I'm not against any of that. But I think what Scripture tells us to do is don't focus so much on yourself that you forget to help, especially a brother or sister in Christ. Now, if you can help others, that's good too. But as well as trying to defend your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, your homes, your families, don't defend them and then subject them and take advantage of them simply because you can. And I think it's a fine line, and it's something that people in business, wherever you are, wherever, is something that we have to be careful of. I just think we do, because it's easy. And if someone is determined to be stupid with their finances and always stay in trouble, I don't think I'm obligated to bail them out every time they get stupid.
You got the government for that.
Yeah, you got the government for that. They generate stupidity for that. But I think at the same time, if there are those, and I say especially believers, especially the family of God, that we know, doesn't mean we pay all their bills for them, but that we can help in some form. I think part of the gold, silver, precious stones of building upon our faith in Jesus Christ is that we help that person if we can. You don't take from your own family to be able to help somebody else. That's going backwards. But I think we do have an obligation, and I think the Holy Spirit will lead us to those times when He taps you and says, you can do something about this. And then you follow His leading. It's not a star in your crown, but it is a jewel, precious stone, or gold that you're building that the Lord will reward. And I don't think you can just draw up a list. Okay, when you see this. But Paul did say, don't take care of a widow unless she's really a widow. Remember that in Thessalonians? He said, make sure that they really do need your help. If they need your help, now you do it. But if they don't need your help, if they're lost their husband, but they're young enough, they want to get married again, they still want to have a family, okay, let them go. It's not the church's responsibility to take care of them. And I think that's part of an example of what I'm talking about here. And it's sticky, I know. It's sticky, I know. We see this And part of the problem that Nehemiah was facing, and he gives, verses 6 through 19, he goes down and he gives 7 elements of conflict resolution here. And evidently I'm not going to get to them because I hear, the crows in the hall. They're ready to come eat some corn. But one of the things Nehemiah was facing is that he didn't have the luxury of running off this crowd that had taken advantage of people. He needed everybody he could get in Jerusalem building the wall. So he was, okay, I can't fire these people. I can't run them off. What do I do to try to resolve and recover this group issue of conflict? And there's 7 things that he does. And we'll look at those next week, but there's 7 elements of conflict resolution that he gives to us here. Thank you. I don't know if I'm welcome for all that I've said, but thank you.